Hello everyone, and welcome to DE Classified, a podcast showcasing the history of destroyer escorts. Each month, a member of the USS Slater's education crew will highlight a specific destroyer escort and share the stories of the sailors who served aboard these trim but deadly ships. I am Brad, a tour guide aboard the USS Slater, and today we're going to declassify USS Walter S. Brown. Walter S. Brown enlisted in the Navy on January 9, 1940. He was then assigned to Patrol Squadron 24 and was based in the Naval Air Station in Kaneohe Bay, Oahu, Hawaii on October 9. By November 1, 1941, he had reached the rank of Aviation's Mate 2nd Class. The air station in Kaneohe Bay held PBY Catalina flying boats stationed on both water and land. As part of VP-24, Brown's role was to service the planes on the ground and in the air. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft carriers launched an attack on Pearl Harbor at 7:48 a.m. But Pearl Harbor was not the only military base attacked. The Japanese attacked multiple Navy and Army bases across Hawaii, including Kaneohe Bay. Brown attempted to repel the attacking Japanese planes as they bombed and strafed the station. Brown died in the attack and would receive commendations by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet for his selfless bravery. The Walter S. Brown, DE-258, was laid down in the Boston Naval Yard on January 10, 1943, and would be completed on February 22nd. The ship is completed in just 43 days and commissioned on June 25th of the same year, sponsored by Mrs. Garth Thomas. The Brown would be commanded by Lieutenant Colonel W. L. Harmon. The ship was an Everett-class destroyer escort. The Everett-class destroyer escort was the first one to enter service and the smallest of the classes, being 15 feet shorter than the other 5 classes. They had shorter range, poorer seakeeping characteristics, and lacked the enclosed main deck passageway of the later classes of destroyer escorts. Despite these initial troubles, the Everett class paved the way for destroyer escorts, proving the concept of a mass-produced escort vessel. It was armed with 3 3-inch 50 caliber guns, 1 quad 28mm anti-aircraft gun, 9 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 1 Hedgehog projector, and a combination of 10 depth charge throwers and roller racks. The ship was propelled by 4 General Motor diesel engines, which could provide a combined 6,000 horsepower to the ship. The ship had a crew of 186 men throughout its service in World War II. The shakedown cruise for the ship and crew took place off the coast of Casco, Maine, to make sure both crew and ship were in shape for service. Once it had concluded, the Brown joined Escort Division 5, headed by the flagship USCG Campbell, a Coast Guard cutter. The Walter S. Brown and the rest of the division would escort vessels from the northeastern coast of the United States to Gibraltar and several ports in the Mediterranean, including North Africa, Malta, Sicily, and among others. All the convoys that the Walter S. Brown took part in were UG convoys. UG convoys came in 2 different forms, UGF and UGS. The UG designates the convoy as eastbound from the United States to or through the Strait of Gibraltar. The S designated the convoy as a slow convoy, and the F designated it as a fast convoy. To the ships escorting these convoys, the F meant slow, and the S meant even slower. These convoys to the Mediterranean and northern coast of Africa were risky because of the proximity of German air power in the coast of North Africa and the southern coast of Europe. These convoys were at risk of these attacks once they approached and passed through the Strait of Gibraltar. One of the more catastrophic German air attacks was on UGS-38. The convoy is comprised of 85 merchant vessels, 1 U.S. Coast Guard cutter, 11 destroyer escorts, 1 American destroyer, the Lansdale, and Netherlands AA cruiser Heemskerk provided the bulk of the anti-air power within the convoy. On April 20th, 1944 at 2100, the convoy picked up aircraft on their air search radar extremely close to the convoy. Without any early warnings about the attack, the convoy was caught off guard. The first attack was led by 5 Ju-88 German bombers coming from the east. These planes were twin-engine multi-role combat aircraft. These ones were carrying torpedoes. The incoming aircraft flew extremely low to the water, shrouding their silhouette with the coastline behind them. This caused AA guns on the ships to have extreme difficulty of making out the aircraft and creating an effective anti-air fire. The ships were forced to fire into a dark void at the sounds of the aircraft. The ineffective anti-air fire allowed German aircraft all the opportunity to make the decisions of how they wanted to attack. The first wave of Ju-88s launched several torpedoes, and several of these made contact with ships in the convoy. The most catastrophic hit was taken by the SS Paul Hamilton. The Paul Hamilton was carrying a combination of explosives and 498 men from the Army Air Force. The torpedo struck the storage of the high explosives, and the ship exploded instantly and was lost with all hands, taking 580 men on board. Another torpedo struck SS Samite, and to a much less extreme degree, but still heavily damaging the ship. The second wave of the attacks came from the north and south of the convoy simultaneously. The attack comprised of 7 more Ju-88s launching torpedoes from multiple directions. This wave of attacks hit 2 of the merchant ships, the SS Stephen T. Austin and SS Royal Star. The third and final wave of the attack came from the southeast. The angle of attack was directed at the coffin corner of the convoy. The coffin corner was where all the ships loaded with explosives were within the convoy. The attack was led by 5 HE-111s, German twin-engine bomber aircraft. The destroyer Lansdale took the majority of the attack and was struck by 1 torpedo and sank within minutes of the strike. The torpedo struck the forward engine room, the explosion broke the keel, and killed the power to the whole ship. Dead in the water and unable to see the attackers, the order to abandon ship was given at 21:30. 47 of the 282 crew went down with the ship. The German planes disappeared with only taking minor damage. The convoy lost 3 ships, the USS Lansdale, the Royal Star, and the Paul Hamilton. This was the most effective German air attack on any eastbound convoy and employed several tactics to create an extremely effective attack. The low altitude of these planes allowed them to pass by land surface-to-air radar stations and evade Allied patrol aircraft. Without early warning, the German aircraft were able to use the coastline to shadow their approach and prevented the convoy from deploying an effective smokescreen disguising the location of the ships within the convoy. 3 weeks after this disastrous convoy, the Walter S. Brown took part in UGS-40. The Brown arrived in Hampton Roads, Virginia to join UGS-40. The ship would remain there for 2 days before heading off with the convoy. The convoy left with 65 merchants being escorted by 4 elderly Piper destroyers from World War I, 2 French destroyers, and 6 destroyer escorts from the Escort Division 5, including the Brown. The convoy escort flagship would be the USCG Cutter Campbell. In response to the disaster of UGS-38, this convoy was better prepared for repelling a German air attack once they had passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean. An elaborate air defense plan had been created by Commander Jesse C. Sowell aboard the Campbell. The convoy held a variety of drills before leaving Virginia and as they crossed the Atlantic. This plan intended to respond to a massive aerial attack using bombs, torpedoes, and radio-controlled glider bombs. As the convoy arrived at the Strait of Gibraltar, they acquired more support from British vessels HMS Caledon, an anti-air cruiser, USS Wilhoit, an American destroyer escort, and USS Benson, an American destroyer. They also acquired the support of 2 American minesweepers carrying jamming devices to confuse German glide bombs, and 1 British salvage tug. On May 9th, the convoy passed through the Strait of Gibraltar without any incident, and as they entered the Mediterranean, the crew began to notice German planes stalking the convoy from afar. These snoopers posed no threat by themselves, but the presence of them suggested the threat of an impending attack. 10 sorties were launched to pursue the stalking aircraft over the next 2 days, but even the radar-equipped Bristol Beaufighters were unable to keep the German aircraft away for long. German aircraft maintained a presence around the convoy consistently for 2 days. The crews of the convoys were aware of these planes and the constant threat of the air attack. The first warning of the attack came from the air search radars. At 13:16, the shore-based radar picked up the presence of an enemy air force headed towards the location of the convoy. The sun was high in the sky at this time, in stark contrast to the attack on USS 38, which had taken place at night. The convoy went into general quarters and prepared to meet the aircraft. The crew aboard the Brown would eagerly await the sight of enemy aircraft, but it never came. Hesitantly, the general quarters was lowered and then raised again shortly after. It appeared the enemy would wait until dusk to make their attack, just as they had before. The convoy received alerts from these shore-based radars several times before the attacks actually came. The alerts occurred at 1512, 1917, and 1944, the crews going to general quarters each time the alert was raised. The Brown was located on the starboard bow of the convoy and was 6,000 yards off the Campbell, which was heading the convoy. Commander Saul warned the crews of his escort division to be extra vigilant as the attack was expected at any moment. At 20:25, the air radar saw the approach of the enemy aircraft, and in response the convoys adjusted their formation into columns. The USS Dobler, DE-48 on the port, and the USS Ellis, DD-154 on the starboard of the Brown, covering its flanks. Behind them, the convoy broke into 8 columns averaging 7 ships long. The columns were 1,000 yards apart, and each ship was roughly 500 yards apart. It changed its heading to directly east. The convoy is passing Cape Benguet, just 5 miles off the shoreline, to the starboard south, the same place USS 38 had been attacked just weeks before. The Brown received orders to lay smoke to help conceal the locations of the ships within the convoy. The sun had just set, and the moonless overcast sky provided little light for the crew, and the smoke limited the visibility even further. As the Brown was laying smoke, a mixed force of German aircraft approached from the rear of the convoy. At 20:43, Ju-88s, HE-111s, and DO-217s were spotted by the crews. These planes were carrying a variety of weaponry, all capable of dealing heavy damage to the convoy. The planes split up into several groups to attack from different directions and put the convoy into a dangerous crossfire. The first planes to make contact with the convoy were crossing right across the Brown sector of defense. The formation of planes was flying directly at the bow of the ship, and the gun crews would have little time before the planes flew directly over the ship and out of sight. All planes were less than 50 feet above the water, flying extremely low. The first 2 planes quickly passed out of sight of the gunners before they could train their guns on them, but the planes directly after were not so lucky. The forward 20mm guns and the forward 3-inch gun began firing at the incoming aircraft. 2 planes in the formation were the focus of the fire of the Brown and the nearby Dobler. The Brown confirmed hits on both of the planes as they made their way over the bow of the ship. In response to the bristling fire and damage to their planes, one plane entered a steep climb to get out of the arc of the accurate fire from the Brown. But the plane then entered a steep bank to the side and lost control and crashed into the water behind the ship. The other planes kept its course deeper into the convoy. As this was happening, the gun crews got word of a 5th plane coming from an angle on the starboard side of the ship. The forward guns swung to the right to respond to this new threat. As the plane passed over the Dobler, the Brown's gun saw their target and the plane found itself in a crossfire between the 2 ships. The plane took many hits from the 2 ships and it flew right over the bow of the Brown, passing from starboard to port Motor machinist mate Herrick Gold said that when he looked up he was able to see the face of the pilot as he flew over. 2 officers on the flying bridge witnessed the plane fly almost directly over their heads and get about 200 yards past the ship before dropping into the waters between the Brown and the Ellis. The plane tumbled a short ways before sinking into the waters between the 2 ships. The gunners that shot down the plane did not witness the plane crashing as they got word of another plane coming from ahead of the ship. This time, the guns swung wildly to the right and immediately opened fire. The plane was flying low and in a predictable pattern, the signs of a plane looking to drop a torpedo at the leading escorts. The captain ordered to turn the rudder hard right to avoid the incoming torpedo. The overwhelming fire from the Brown was enough to dissuade the plane from its attack, and it diverted its course before dropping any torpedoes. The Brown had endured the first wave of attacks. Its guns had been firing for 7 minutes straight as the planes came in one after another. In those 7 minutes, the ship fired 155 3-inch shells, 344 1.1-inch rounds, and 2,130 rounds of 20mm ammunition. Throughout the initial wave, the crew felt several underwater explosions but were unable to identify the source. Art Riggle, a sailor aboard the Brown, said that he saw 2 torpedoes pass by the ship throughout the engagement. The war diary makes no mention of this, but it is very possible that these torpedoes were only seen by some of the crew and were not reported in the chaotic conditions and the smoke screen. The other waves of the attack came from different angles within the convoy and out of sight of the Brown's gunners. The smoke screen the Brown and the other escorts had dropped had now spread across the entire convoy, making the visibility extremely short. Occasionally, the Brown's crew heard a large explosion and saw a bright flash through the smoke screen. The crew had no idea whether these were German planes exploding as they were shot down or successful torpedo strikes against the ships the Brown was supposed to be protecting. Soon, all was silent, and the crews waited for the next incoming attack. After some time, the smoke screen dissipated and the general quarters was lifted. Throughout the attack, the crew made frequent observation of a distant light on the African coast. It was a white light that flashed intermittently as it moved slowly along the coast. The crew speculate the light was being used as a homing signal for the planes to make the strikes more accurate. They reported the light never changed direction and was far too slow to be a plane in between the convoy and the shore. Shortly after midnight on May 12th, the convoy was able to check for casualties, damage to their ships, and the damage they had done to the attackers. The damage sustained from the attack on the Brown was not inflicted by any aircraft but from several of the guns misfiring. No damage the crew couldn't fix, and soon all guns had been cleared and ready to be used again if needed. As the crews were securing the smoke generator, a small fire broke out, as an excess of oil had collected in the pan and was lit. The fire was quickly put out, and it was confirmed that no one on board had been injured in the ordeal. The Brown was ordered to head to the rear of the convoy to search for any possible casualties from the attacks alongside the USS Everett, HMT Hengist, and FMS Scimitar. The prolonged search yielded no results, and the ship had returned to its station by 05:45. The attack had lasted roughly from 2100 to 2140, with a few lulls between the waves of the attackers. The Brown had been contributed with shooting down 2.5 planes during the attack. The convoy had lost no ships, not one had even taken a hit from any of the German planes. The only injuries were 4 Army passengers that had been hit by another ship's 20mm guns. The Brown had suffered no damage and had succeeded in protecting the ships within its convoy. The German planes had successfully launched multiple torpedoes into the convoy, but had not landed any successful hits. The smoke shrouding the locations of the ships in the convoy and the overwhelming anti-aircraft fire rushed the planes into dropping their torpedoes at no particular ship. This made them easy to evade, and many were never any risk to any of the ships. The German planes also dropped radio-controlled glider bombs, but those were also ineffective as they were spotted early and easily avoided by the convoy. The minesweepers carrying the jamming devices might have had an impact on the effectiveness of these glider bombs, but there is no way to confirm it. Allied planes from the coast prevented German fighters from providing air cover and bolstering the forces of the attackers. In the end, the convoy had been attacked by 62 aircraft and had managed to shoot down 19 of them. This would be the best defense of a convoy against German air attack in the Mediterranean without the support of an escort carrier. Later that year, the Mediterranean became much safer as German air power was interrupted as their airfields in southern France fell under attack from American air power in preparation for the landings in Normandy. The Browns spent the remainder of the war escorting convoys across the Atlantic from the East Coast to North African ports. At this point, the German U-boat threat had been almost completely neutralized alongside German air power. The Brown did not have any more interaction with any German fighting forces for the rest of the war. In September 1944, the ship went through the Great Atlantic Hurricane of 1944, as they were off of Cape Hatteras. The ship was waiting as they were amassing the ships for a convoy across the Atlantic. On September 14th, the ship would go through a Category 2 hurricane with winds of 110 miles per hour and waves that reached up to 70 feet high, well above the top of the superstructure. A couple days before the hurricane had reached Cape Hatteras, it was off the coast of Florida. At that time, the storm was a Category 4 hurricane when it hit a group of ships 450 miles off of Vero Beach. One of these was USS Warrington DD-383. As the ship went down, they lost 248 men, and the storm sank a number of smaller vessels. Many from these vessels were rescued, but there was still a significant loss of life from this storm. The Brown made it through the hurricane without any significant damage and no loss of life. The preparedness of the crew and the lessened severity of the storm did not help the living conditions too much on board the Brown. During times like this, the crew on board had to eat soup and sandwiches as the seas were too rough to make any other kind of food. The grouping of the convoy was ruined, and it took 2 days for all ships to fall back into line. Shortly after they returned in formation, they made their way across the Atlantic with no issues. The storm ravaged the East Coast, doing significant damage all the way from Florida to New England. In the summer of 1945, after the end of the war, the Brown operated in training exercises with submarines off the northeast coast. The ship was decommissioned on October 4, 1945, and would finish being scrapped on the 12th of July in 1946. Most of the Everett-class destroyer escorts were scrapped by 1948. They were the first class designed and implemented, so they were the first ones stricken. Many other classes of DEs were given to other countries after World War II, but very few of the Everett-class DEs would be. This class of DE proved the concept of the destroyer escorts, and the Walter S. Brown is a shining example that these ships played a crucial role in winning World War II and continue serving for many years after. Thank you for listening to DE Classified. This podcast is brought to you by the Destroyer Escort Historical Museum aboard USS Slater. You can find a transcript of this episode, accompanying photos, and a bibliography at ussslater.org/DE-classified. I'm Brad, and I hope you join us next month when we DE classify another destroyer escort.